Hello guys, David Sweeney, chiropractor here from Dublin, Ireland. Today's video is all about vitamin D3 and hopefully we can unpack all the concepts around vitamin D3. There's a wealth of information out there. I've selected an article from the BMJ, that's the British Medical Journal, and it's really top shelf research articles there, really well respected. So hope you enjoy all the content. It took me a while to read through it all, so I'm going to try to really pick out the really key areas. I'm going to post a link in the description if you want to read the whole thing yourself. So let's jump into it and enjoy the video. Okay, so vitamin D deficiency is the most underdiagnosed medical condition in children and adults. This is largely because patients do not typically present with overt clinical signs and symptoms until the deficiency is severe and prolonged. So in children, this would present as rickets, which is basically skeletal abnormalities, developmental delay, failure to thrive. Adults presents signs of osteomalacia, which will be bone tenderness, pain, proximal muscular weakness, so kind of difficulty getting out of a seat, things like that. So in addition to the skeletal effects, it is recognized that vitamin D deficiency increases the risks of many chronic diseases, including cancer, autoimmune disease, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and hypertension, cognitive dysfunction, infectious diseases, including upper respiratory tract infections and tuberculosis. That's an important statement, isn't it? Especially in this time of our current pandemic, and osteoarthritis, as well as depression and schizophrenia. So guys, I think it could be a really good idea to read the epidemiology section of the report to truly understand the effects of lack of vitamin D and how important this really is, if you haven't already got that from what I've said so far. Now, this is interesting. A major source of vitamin D for humans is exposure to sunlight. Now, avoiding sunlight or sun exposure is a risk factor. And also, this is interesting, including the heavy use of sunscreen. Now, get this. SPF factor 8 reduces vitamin D production by 92%. SPF 30 reduces vitamin D production by 95%. Okay, so if we want to get vitamin D from the sunlight, we can't use protection. The season and the latitude, the time of the day also strongly influence how much vitamin D we produce. Now, what's interesting here is if we have increased skin pigmentation, this is also a risk factor because the melanin actually has a sun screening action and reduces the production of the vitamin through the skin. So that means if you're non-Caucasian, you're going to have a harder time especially in this Irish climate that we have. It's low light, there's not a lot of power in the sun, so Caucasians are going to be having an easier time. Their skin type will have an easier time of producing the optimal levels of vitamin D3. Aging is also considered a factor because as we age, we get a reduction. So, for example, a 70-year-old has a 70% reduction in the production capability as compared to a young adult. Back to the obesity issue. So, if the BMI is over 30. The fat sequesters the vitamin D. That just means it hides it away in the system. So the rationale is, that's the rationale behind recommending 2 to 3 times more vitamin D3 supplementation to both treat the deficiency and also prevent reoccurrence. Okay, so how do we make sure we don't suffer from the deficiency? Well, it's actually not possible to obtain the acquired amount through dietary sources, both natural and fortified foods. So that means we need to have a combination of sensible sun exposure, so not staying out until we burn because that causes skin cancer, right? And also adequate supplementation for both children and adults will actually prevent the deficiency or insufficiency in the general population. That will maximize bone health. It will reduce the risk of many chronic diseases. What's really interesting is even in the most sunniest parts of the world, Middle East, India, Colombia, Mexico, Brazil, Australia, vitamin D deficiency and insufficiency is actually really common just because of inadequate sun exposure and probably the use of sunscreen and not allowing that change to happen. Vitamin D cannot be made in the winter unless you're below 35 degrees latitude, and we're nowhere close to that. So we cannot create vitamin D in the winter. 2011 Endocrine Society states that infants are under 1 year olds 400 to 1000 IU per day, children right up to age 18 600 to 1000 IU per day, and then adults 1500 to 2000 IU per day. Also, higher risk would be, as I mentioned before, obese, non-Caucasian, someone that's always wearing sun protection or protective outdoor clothing. They maybe should be evaluated for the deficiency by actually measuring the serum level of 25 hydroxyvitamin D, sorry. And as I said before, so that should be hopefully over at least 30 nanograms per milliliter. Right, so one other thing about the aging process, so it actually doesn't affect how we're able to absorb the vitamin D3 from a supplement. So let's say, for example, you were taking 2000 IU or above per day, you would still get that into your system. It's actually the skin's ability to change that exposure to the vitamin D3. So for example, a young adult in one sun exposure, so one minimal erythemal dose, that means a dose of sun that doesn't burn your skin. Let's say that's about 15-20 minutes for the average person, say at about 12 or 1 o'clock during the day. So they get 15,000 IU, 15,000 IU of vitamin D3, whereas the 70-year-old will make 5,000 IU, so a full third less. That's still a lot. So think about if you were taking 2000 IU of vitamin D3 per day, you could just go out into the sun for 15-20 minutes and you get 15,000 if you were a young adult. And even if you're a 70-year-old, you're still getting 5,000. So you don't necessarily need to take the supplement the day that you're out and about in the sun, making sure your body's exposed about 1/3 of the body. I think that's where they're getting the figures from this. So 1/3 of the body exposed, no sun protection on, and about 15 to 20 minutes. And if you burn at that level, you shouldn't. That's too much for you. Your skin is actually going to produce a lot of vitamin D3 if you're burning early. So if you're very fair skin, I'm very, very fair skin, so about kind of 20 minutes is about adequate there for me. Maybe I can sometimes push it to about 30 minutes. Should be fine. Sometimes we can protect the face and the ears and things with a hat and use the more rougher, thicker skin elsewhere to absorb the sunlight. There's something else super interesting here for secondary prevention. So once we get those levels up to 60 nanograms per milliliter, daily oral maintenance supplementation should be initiated and continued for life. Now here's something I didn't really understand until I read through this document. Lactating women may need to take as much as 4,000 to 6,000 IU daily to satisfy the infant's vitamin D requirements. Also for secondary prevention of someone that's been deficient, sensible outdoor exposure to the sun 2 to 3 times per week is also recommended. So super interesting. That's really interesting about the lactating woman as well. So breastfed child needs the vitamin D source from the mother, and she should be taking 4,000 to 6,000 IU every single day. Okay. So guys, we talked about the various risk factors for insufficiency, and if you fit into that risk factor, you're not getting your sun exposure, you've a darker skin type, or you don't take supplementation, you probably want to get a test, and you can order that online, or even better, you could do it through the GP as well. And if you were insufficient, here's the thing about it: you're going to need 6,000 IU per day. And you're going to have to do that for about 8 weeks. Now, you could do that per day, or you could take 50,000 once a week and do that for 8 weeks as well. It kind of works out about the same there. And then you follow it up with the maintenance dosing of 2000 IU per day. Now, the only way you're going to know if that works is if you were to test after it as well. So I think the idea here is we get the test done. If you're really insufficient, boom, you need to follow a protocol for high dosing for about 8 weeks, and then you can go on to the 2000 IU per day maintenance. But you're gonna want to measure about 6 months later where you are, how many nanograms per milliliter you have in your blood, and make sure you're coming up to those higher levels that we talked about, 80, 90, 100. We definitely don't want to be below 30. If you're below 30, that's a huge risk factor for a lot of problems, and you don't need to suffer that. So for someone like myself, 2000 per day. I don't use sunscreen. I go out, I get the sun. Yeah, I protect the face sometimes with a cap or with a jumper if a t-shirt if I'm out sunbathing, something like that. I've got very fair skin, so what I need to do is not burn. So that's going to be 20 minutes for me. If it's a cooler day, maybe 30 minutes. If it's a very hot day, yeah, 20 minutes is going to be perfect, and that's going to give me 15,000 IU. So before we go over the summary for the video, check the description for a vitamin D3 supplement. Also check for the article that I've based this on, and also the home testing kit from the UK that you can use. So also please subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching so far. I hope you enjoyed the material, and please subscribe to the channel. We've just started out and your support means a lot. Okay, so now the summary. If you're a pregnant mother breastfeeding, sorry, not a pregnant mother, sorry, if you're breastfeeding, 4,000 IU per day. If your child is stopped the breastfeeding under 400 IU, over 1 year of age, 600 IU. For adults, 2000 IU. If you're in the sunshine, 2 to 3 times per week during the summer months. You won't necessarily need to supplement, but remember, in Ireland, we don't get high amounts of sunshine. So it's okay if you're a Caucasian, your skin type's likely to create adequate amounts of vitamin D3 in the summertime. If you're non-Caucasian, you are in a higher risk factor, especially living in Ireland. So it might be a full year-round supplementation of 2000 IU that you should use there. Also, if you're obese as well, you need to increase your dosage maybe to 4000 IU. And also the elderly, probably taking the supplement year-round as well, because remember, the skin type, you're going to have a 70% reduction in how much you can create even in the good summer days that we have when they arrive, if they ever arrive, although we've been pretty lucky for the last few weeks. Now finally, some safety concerns. So vitamin D intoxication is extremely rare, and it happens because of excessive high doses of vitamin D3, and that would be greater than 10,000 IU per day. Now, if you are insufficient or deficient, sometimes they'll give you 50,000 IU once each week. So the point here is not to exceed that. So 10,000 per day would be 70,000 per week. So that's probably too high, and there's medical risks with that. So according to this, now that might change. We might review this in a few weeks, a few years from now, and it might be totally fine, and they'll review that. But at the moment, greater than 10,000 IU per day isn't recommended. So the 2000 IU is perfectly safe, especially if you're going to do some of the blood testing. And if you stay in that sweet spot at about 100 nanograms per milliliter, I think you're going to be doing really, really well. Here it mentions as well not to exceed 150 nanograms per milliliter. That's where they think the intoxication may happen from. So as long as you're in around that sweet spot, that'll be all good there. So hope you enjoyed the video, and post your comments below if you have any questions. Cheers.